Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. I'm Ben, and this is the new Paul Reed Smith SE NF3. Let's get into it. So the truth is, I've actually never played a Paul Reed Smith guitar before this one, but I've known about them my entire guitar playing life, as long as I've known about Fender or Gibson or any of the other big brands. See, one of my biggest musical influences growing up was this small local Los Angeles band called Oingo Boingo, fronted by Danny Elfman, who's known more now for his film scores than his alt-rock new wave band that he started in like the late 70s. Danny Elfman always played a Fender Jaguar until about 1992 or 93 when he switched over to a Paul Reed Smith Custom 24. Now the first time I saw that guitar at one of the shows, I was blown away. I was mesmerized even. I actually thought it was one of the most beautiful guitars I had seen at the time. It's a dead man's party. Who could ask for more? Everybody's come and leave your body at the door. Leave your body and soul at the door. And he still plays that guitar to this day, that exact guitar, which says something about it, right? I mean, I guess my point is, for as long as I've known about them, I've just never really had a desire to own one. And I imagine some of that is because I fell in love with Les Pauls and SGs very early in my guitar playing career. And then I think somewhere along the line when I could actually afford to buy my own guitars, there was sort of this stigma around Paul Reed Smith guitars of they lack personality, they all sound the exact same, as if sounding like a great guitar was a bad quality, right? Of course, not having really ever played any, I can't speak to that. And besides that, that sounds a little bit silly anyway. So I'm ready to move beyond that. Now purists will probably point out that this is just an SE guitar and not part of the Paul Reed Smith core line, and that would be like equating a Squire to some of the Fender custom models, or maybe an LTD to an ESP USA model. I realize that, and I have my expectations set to what I think most budget guitars should at least play like. Now that being said, I am really curious to get into this thing a little bit more. Now this is the newest model in the Paul Reed Smith SE line. I just learned that SE stands for Student Edition, which I guess has a better ring to it than Budget Edition. This guitar is made in Indonesia by a company called Cork. Now a lot of companies contract with Cork to make their budget lines. I think BC Rich does it, Ibanez might do it. They've been making guitars for about 50 or 60 years across Indonesia and China, and they claim that they always strive to make better guitars at a quality price. And I think they ship something like 1 million guitars a year to these other manufacturers, which says something about their quality and commitment. And this just happens to be one of those guitars. So let's get into it. Now currently the NF3 is about $800 out the door brand new, which actually puts it pretty low cost-wise in the SE line. For example, they've got the new PRS SE CE24, the satin one that you might have seen, for about $500, and then you can get all the way up to hollow bodies and semi-hollow bodies in the SE line for $1,400, $1,500, $1,600. So when you look at it that way and the feature set that this guitar has, $799 is actually not too bad of a price for it. Now I appreciate that this guitar actually comes with a gig bag. It seems like more and more the budget models of guitars are just thrown into a cardboard box with some strategically placed foam and then shipped across the world. So it's really nice to see a relatively affordable model come with a gig bag. It's certainly convenient if you're a budding guitarist and you want to take your guitar to a friend's house or to band practice or whatever, so that you too can actually protect it instead of throwing it in a box and taking it with you. So back to the gig bag. Now we see SE sewn right into the front there. Got some nice fat tooth zippers. The guitar easily fits inside as expected, right? I've certainly gotten some gig bags from Fender before that were like glorified tote bags. It's got a sizable front pocket with a few compartments in there. You could maybe store some pens or some of those hard, thin Italian breadsticks or something in there. You could also easily fit some sheet music in here. There's also some Allen keys for adjusting the truss rod and the whammy bar, which we'll talk about in a bit. Oh, and of course, there's the whammy bar also. And then you've got a couple toe tags that talk about PRS strings in the SE series. Now on the back side, we've got some padded shoulder straps, always a nice touch, and a decent soft carrying handle as well. It's a decent gig bag, and I'd certainly rather have one than not have one. I don't like this color, but you don't really buy the guitar for the gig bag color. When it comes to the look of this guitar, well, it's no secret that it's based on an S-style or Stratocaster style body. And the silhouette does pretty much match a Strat. But this one is actually based on an earlier NF3 model that came out in 2010, maybe 2011. And it had the same sort of carve here, which is one of the first things you notice. It's a little bit unusual for an S-style body. But it didn't have as much carving up here on the top horn as this model has. Now, one of the first things that caught my eye was actually these pickups, because they kind of reminded me of the staple P90s from like the late 50s, but obviously the staples were turned 90 degrees from these. Completely different pickups, but it did remind me of that a little bit. Now, other things that caught my eye was the fact that there's no jack on the face here, which you see that on a lot of S-style guitars from all sorts of different manufacturers. So overall, dimensionally, it's very Strat-like, but it is quite a bit different, which we're going to get into now. Now this PRS is a Poplar body, which is a Poplar selection for all sorts of budget guitars all around the world. The body itself is just a slab, about 1.75 inches thick here, but you do have some convenient carving that you're probably already pretty familiar with. For example, you've got this little carve here where your strumming hand is, which you see on every single Stratocaster, and likewise you've also got this belly carve here, which adds to the comfort and ergonomics, of course. Now one thing that is different, as I mentioned earlier, is you do have this carve here on the lower horn in case you've got abnormally large knuckles and need to do finger exercises while you're playing. Now one thing that does make this guitar a little bit different than your standard Stratocaster body or even the earlier released NF3 is there's a little bit more carving right here on the top horn, and I don't know if you can see that. I'll try and get a close-up photo of that, but it just adds a nice look to it and makes it look a little more sleeker as well. Now this guitar does have a very thick finish on it, and as such I can't really tell you how many pieces this body is made up of. Even when I took off the cavities and looked inside, they've got like grounding paint or material in there, so you can't see any clear delineations of anything. But I would guess, after doing much research, that this guitar is probably like all their other SE models in that it's 2 or 3 pieces of wood that are glued together to make this general body shape. Now speaking of finishes, this is the pearl white model, but there's also a gunmetal gray, an ice blue metallic, and a metallic orange model, which I almost got, but I figured this one would have more longevity and I would get less sick of it. As you've probably guessed already, this guitar is a maple neck. This is a scarf joint neck, which is different than what you'd find on a Gibson or a Fender. Now the joint begins right around the nut and it ends somewhere around the 2nd fret. It's a pretty long joint, and that helps explain why this angle is pretty shallow actually. Now regarding the profile of this neck, well, PRS calls it a wide thin neck. Now since these guitars are pretty much foreign to me, I had never heard that term before, but what that basically means is the nut has their standard width, which is about 1.68 on this guitar, but the actual thickness of the neck and the fretboard is pretty thin from the 1st fret all the way down to the end of the neck. So if you're primarily a Gibson player like me, you could look at this as almost like a slim taper neck. Now the dimensions of this neck in particular, well, as I said before, the nut comes in at about 1.68. Now for the 1st fret I get a 0.81, and for the 12th fret I get a 0.90. So not much rise between those frets. It's about, what, a little less than a tenth. The radius of this fretboard is 10 inches, which is a little bit different than your Fender 9.5 inches or your Gibson 12-inch radiuses, right? And in case you're wondering, this fretboard material is rosewood. However, they do offer every single finish of this guitar with a maple fretboard as well. Now, I don't think I've mentioned this yet, but this guitar is a bolt-on neck, which I'm guessing a lot of you put together already when I said it was a Strat style. And the neck and the body sit just about flat with each other, with really not much angle back at all. Now one of the things that I am actually pretty excited about is this guitar is a 25-inch scale. So the majority of Gibson guitars are 24 3/4. The majority of Fender guitars are 25.5 inch. And then Fender's got some short scale or Gibson scale guitars, and Gibson has some longer or Fender scale guitars. But what I've never played before is a 25-inch scale guitar, which, you know, is only what, 1/4 of an inch bigger than a Gibson scale and about a 1/2 inch shorter than a Fender scale, but I'm really curious how it's going to feel, especially with these big dumb hands of mine, because I'll admit, sometimes when I'm attempting to play a solo, it does get a little stuffy down here where the frets have minimal spacing, so maybe just that little bit will be enough to give me an advantage, but it won't be so wide by the time it gets up here that I won't be able to play cowboy chords or something like that. So I don't know. I'm really looking forward to giving that a shot, as nerdy as that sounds. Now for the hardware, let's start at the bottom and we'll work our way to the top. So at the bottom here, you've got these nice stainless steel strap buttons here. They're like flattened mushroom design, same one that you've got on the top of the horn there. And they look like they do their job pretty good. You know, they've got a nice thick round head on it with minimal post there in the middle. And then just over from the strap button, you've got a nice metal jack plate, which is great because for a long time, budget guitars were using these plastic ones that always broke. Now just up from there, you get to the patented PRS Tremolo bridge. Now, I am a neophyte of not just PRS guitars, but pretty much whammy bars in general. I never really have used them. I know what they do, of course, but it's never been a part of my playing style. So I actually really did a lot of research to find out just exactly what is the difference between this system and the vintage Fender system. Because you have to remember, this came out in 1984, and Fender was using their vintage trem system until 1986 when they redesigned it. Maybe based on some inspiration that they had seen on some other guitars somewhere, perhaps. The short of it is that PRS pretty much introduced a knife plate here and some specific notches in the screws that go into the body here. So as a result, when you would use the trem, the knife edge had a better consistency lining up in the same spot when it would return to neutral zone, right? Whereas on some of the Fender systems where it was just a blunt plate against a thick screw, it didn't always do that. Now the second thing that he added were these little shoulders on the bridge here to keep the saddles in line so they wouldn't move so much side to side. Now the third major improvement was that he put these notches with compound radiuses here where the strings run through so that the string has a nice smooth glide over whether you're bending it forward or if you're tilting it back. Whereas if you look at some of the vintage Fender ones, it's pretty much just a slot between two screws and the string runs through there. So yes, looking into this, I've read and heard stories from a lot of people that say, of course, if you set it up right, the vintage Fender ones aren't a problem. And I believe that 100%. I think maybe Mr. Paul Reed Smith wanted to just come up with something that was a little bit simpler, and it's definitely tried and true because, as I mentioned before, in 1986, Fender redesigned their trem system, which implemented some of this stuff, like the notched saddles. They also implemented the knife bridge plate thing there, except for they went to a 2-screw system instead of having all 6 of these screws in there. So that is the patented PRS trem system, and I've read a lot about it over the past couple days. I'm pretty sure I understand how it works now. Maybe I'm a better person for it, who knows. Now there's one more thing that this bridge has, and that is the adjustable whammy bar thing here. So remember those Allen wrenches that we saw earlier when we were looking inside the case? Well, there's a little set screw down here that if you tighten it, it'll pinch a sleeve, and you can adjust how much of a grip that sleeve has on your whammy bar. So if you want it loose, you would obviously loosen that screw, and if you want it a little bit tighter so you could set the whammy where you want it, then you would tighten that screw. Pretty basic system, and there's a few other companies that have similar designs, like I think Godin has the True Lock system, which operates a little bit similar to that. Now real quick before we move on from there, let's flip it over and look in the back cavity. You can see that we've got a pretty standard trem looking system back there with your springs. This guitar does have a stainless steel block, which is a little bit different than the zinc or the brass that you might find on some higher end models. Now moving on from that, we get to the fretboard here, which has medium jumbo frets, and they are pretty much the same as what you find on a Gibson, and I think that's 6150 wire, but if you play a Gibson, these feel very similar to that. Now moving up from there, we get to the PRS double acting truss rod. So this guitar allows you to adjust for bowing forward or bowing backward, and I think that's a pretty standard feature on almost all PRSs. And then lastly, we get to the tuners. Now PRS says these are custom designed PRS tuners. You can see that they've got the Schaller style tuning key on there. They look pretty nice, they feel pretty good to me as well. These come in at an 18:1 tuning ratio, which is pretty good. And if you're curious, this guitar comes with the PRS Classic light strings, which is a 10, a 13, 17, 26, 36, and a 46. For the electronics on this guitar, well, you've got a 5-way switch, a master volume, and a master tone. The 5-way switch works as you probably think it does, where position 1 controls the bridge pickup, position 2 is the bridge in the middle, and position 3 controls the middle pickup, position 4 is the middle and the neck, and position 5 is for the neck pickup. And when we look at these pickups here, well, these are the Narrowfield, but these are actually Narrowfield DD pickups, and that stands for deep dish. And the reason they call it that is because the bobbins are extra wide so they can get more windings on there, which they say improves some of the clarity, because the goal of these pickups is to mimic a single coil sound but without the hum, which seems like something we've been searching for a long time, right? Now PRS thinks they've gotten closer to it than they've ever been before with these Narrowfield deep dish pickups. Now let's see what's behind this pickguard. You can see we got our 5-way switch right there, some alpha pots, and a generic 22 microfarad cap. About what I expected. Now when it comes to these actual pickups, well, you can see you've got a bass pickup here in the neck and a bass pickup in the middle position, and then a treble pickup in the bridge. So yes, two identical pickups for the middle and neck, and then a single one here for the bridge. I don't really know what that means because there aren't any details released on these pickups yet. I don't know if that means one has slightly more winding or maybe the magnets are a little bit different. Who knows? But I can tell you the readings of these pickups. So for the bridge pickup, I'm getting a 8.74. For the middle, 7.9. And for the neck, a 7.96. For position 2, the bridge in the middle, I'm getting a 4.16. And position 4, the middle and the neck, I'm getting a 3.98. So the bridge is coming in a little bit hotter than the other two pickups. I guess that's pretty standard, right? Well, for other materials, same thing, we'll start at the bottom and work our way up. It's a small thing, but there is a little bit of felt between the strap buttons and the body, and that does count on the upper horn as well, just a little black piece of felt. Then we move to these speed knobs here. You've got one for the tone, one for the volume. Now they aren't labeled volume and tone, but I think everybody pretty much knows how those work, right? Similar configuration as many guitars. Tone on the bottom, volume up top. Next we get to the pickup selector switch tip, which is just a little black piece of plastic. Then we get to our pick guard, which is a 3-ply black, white, black pick guard. And then our pickup covers, which are also black plastic. Then we move to the fretboard here, which has your traditional PRS bird inlays. If you like birds, then you're gonna love it. Now on the side of the fretboard, you've got dot markers, which go all the way down the fretboard, all the way down to the 20th fret, and then your 2 dots on the 12th fret as expected. Now when we move up to the nut here, this guitar has what PRS calls the PRS nut. From what I understand is it's a synthetic material and it's better than it used to be. So we'll see. Jury's out on that. And then we get to our truss rod cover here, which is just a single ply black truss rod cover, and it says NF3 on it. How fitting. And moving up from there, we get to the Paul Reed Smith SE silk screened logo there. And then when we flip the guitar over, you've got a couple plates over here. You've got one for the trem system, as we talked about earlier, that is just a black plastic. And then you've got some sort of composite plate here for the neck. Now for the feel of this guitar, well, it feels very much like a Fender Stratocaster. And that is not a dig against this guitar. It just means that Leo Fender got the design right, and Paul Reed Smith said, hey, that design is not broken, let's not fix it, right? So yeah, great design, simple design, you can't really beat it. Of course, there's no neck dive on this guitar because it's been engineered that way, and yeah, you can see it sits pretty nicely in my lap. And it does feel a lot like any Stratocaster with the carve coming in handy here where you're playing, and then you've got this nice soft rollover where your strumming hand is, which of course is different than the earlier Telecaster models that were just a block of wood right there, right? When it comes to the weight of this guitar, it comes in at about 7.62 pounds or 7 pounds and just under 10 ounces. So it's a touch heavier than I thought, but not too bad. Other than that, I like the way it feels and I'm really eager to play it. So let's get into the sound. When Paul Reed Smith originally came up with the Narrowfield pickups back in 2009 or 10 or something like that, they were looking for a single coil sound that didn't hum. And they said, you know, this is the closest they've gotten with these new DD pickups. But they also admitted that it does kind of more sound like a fatter single coil, almost like a P90 sound. So I'm gonna play a couple things on this guitar in the bridge and the neck position, and then I'll play that exact same thing on a Stratocaster bridge and neck, and I'll do something with P90's bridge and neck, and I'll do maybe an SG bridge and neck, just so we can see what these pickups closely resemble. And then I'm gonna play a couple other things that are just on this guitar, cycling through the different pickups and tone and volume settings. And then we'll just go from there and see what it sounds like. So yeah, I think this guitar does sound a lot like P90s actually. I think out of all those comparisons, closest to that anyway, in both the way it behaves and just the general sound character of it. I do think out of all the budget guitars that I've played and the ones I've reviewed for this channel, this one might be the highest quality yet. There's not really a flaw or blemish on it. Sounds great, features are great, the neck feels great. I did change the strings out for my custom set of strings from Stringjoy, which is just a little bit lighter gauge all around than the classic lights. So I did have to do a little bit of adjusting with that to keep the action and the intonation right. I would definitely recommend this guitar if you're in the market for a budget guitar or maybe an entry-level Paul Reed Smith guitar. I haven't played any other PRSs, so I thought this one pretty much hit it right out of the park, especially for 800 bucks. So that is my review, guys. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. If you liked the video, click the like button, maybe consider subscribing, and I will see you guys next time.